All right, so in the last lesson, we managed to get our swipe cells to work, and we can now swipe on our categories to delete them, and it updates our model accordingly. Now, in this lesson, we're going to talk about how we can copy that functionality over to our to-do list view controller without having to copy all the code. And we mentioned that the way that we're going to tackle this problem is by creating a superclass where both of these view controllers can inherit from. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's hit Command N, and we're going to create a new Coca Touch class. And the reason is because we want to inherit from SwipeTableViewController, because both of these view controllers are table view controllers. And if we need some of that functionality, then we can inherit it over. So we're going to call this class the SwipeTableViewController. And we're going to hit Next, and we're going to save it in our group of controllers. And now this is going to be our superclass. And so we need to add all of the swipe cell functionality inside here. So we're going to import swipe cell kit, of course, and we're going to adopt the protocol, which is swipe table view cell delegate. And I'm going to delete all of this stuff that Xcode has automatically put in here so that we have a nice and clean view controller to work with. Okay, so now we need to copy over everything basically that's inside our extension. So I'm going to hit Cut, and I'm going to paste it over here. Now, because this is a separate class that only deals with the swipe cell functionality, it doesn't actually make sense for it to be inside a separate extension, because then our main class would be empty, right? That doesn't make any sense. So we can go ahead and take out our delegate methods from this extension by cutting it and putting it inside our swipe table view controller. And we can delete our extension completely. So now we have both of those swipe cell delegate methods inside our swipe table view controller. But one thing that we can't do in here is we can't delete our categories. Because remember, if we're going to inherit this class inside both of these classes, we can't have any specific code relating to each of these view controllers. So the superclasses are not meant to have any knowledge of their subclasses or their children. So it sounds a bit cruel, but that's just the way it is. If you watch Planet Earth, you'll realize that the world is pretty ambivalent, the struggles of individuals. And in the world of coding and Swift, it's also the same. Sadly, our swipe table view controller is going to have all of these children, category to view controller and to-do list view controller, but it's not going to care or know about it. So there's a little bit of downer for you, but it will be okay. So I'm going to actually just comment out that block of code. And instead, I'm just going to write print delete cell, just so that we know that this is actually being called when we test it later on. All right, so I think that's all that we need to do over here. But let's head back to our category view controller and delete that pragma mark as well. So now, instead of our category view controller inheriting from UI table view controller, we're actually going to inherit from the swipe table view controller. So we can go ahead and delete this and simply write swipe table view controller. And that was our custom class that we created. So because we want to keep all of the swipe cell functionality inside this superclass swipe table view controller, we actually don't really want any sort of mention to swipe cell kit inside this subclass, which is our category view controller. So I want to be able to delete this import statement and to get rid of all of the mentions of swipe cell kit. And pretty much as soon as you do that, we get an error over here that tells us, hey, by the way, you created this cell and you said that it has to be a swipe cell. And also you set the cell's delegate in order to allow the swipe cell delegate methods to trigger and inform this current class. So we don't want either of these lines of code. But the code that we do need is to change the text label based on the categories inside this view. And SwipeTableViewCell cannot know anything about those categories. So how can we square that circle? So what we can do is we can create the superclass TableViewCell at index path, and then we can override it over here and add a little bit more information to that cell. So let's first head over to SwipeTableViewCell, and we're going to add some TableView data source methods. And the one that we really do need is the cell for row at index path. And here is where we want to initialize the SwipeTableViewCell as the default cell for all of the table views that inherit this class. So we can go ahead and copy some of this code over. And I'm going to delete this code that we copied over from the SwipeCell documentation just to make everything a little bit clearer. So let's head over here and paste that code in here. So you can see that what we did in CategoryViewController is that we created a new cell by dequeuing it using the identifier category cell. Now, we can't have something called category cell if this class doesn't know about its subclasses, right? So we have to change this name to something more generic, like just cell. And for that to work, we have to go back into our main storyboard and change both the identifier for the category cell to cell, and also, because we want both the to-do list view controller and the category view controller to use swipe cells from the swipe table view controller, we're going to rename the to-do item cell also to cell as well. So let's hit save on that, and let's go back to swipe table view cell, and you can see that our identifier is now cell, and that will work for either of those subclasses. And then we get onto this line, and this line basically can't exist because we don't know about categories inside SwipeTableViewController, and we certainly don't know about our data model in here. This is just a front-end UI class. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. And we're going to keep cell.delegate as self because this is the class that has all of those delegate methods that will deal with the deletions. And then we're going to return the cell. And that is all we need to do inside this superclass. Now we're going to head over to our subclass, which is the category view controller. And we need to fix some issues here because we need to be able to set the cell's text label.text property to the name of the categories in our data model. But if we're not going to initialize the cell here, then how can we tap into it? So let's go ahead and delete all the bits of code that we've put in the superclass. And we can tap into that superclass by saying let cell equal super.TableView, and the table view is the same as the one we've got here, and the cell for row at index path. So this is going to tap into that cell that gets created inside our super view. And it taps into the cell at the current index path. And then we're going to take that cell and then we're going to add some more things to it. And that cell is already a swipe cell, but we're going to modify it further by changing the text label to the current category. And then finally, we're going to return cell after all of that work. So when this gets called, the first thing it does is, because we call super, it goes into our super class and triggers the code inside our cell for row at index path. At which point it creates a new cell from the prototype cell called cell, and it gets created as a swipe table view cell. It sets the cell's delegate as this current class, which is the swipe table view controller, to enable all of our delegate methods to work. And then it returns that cell. And that cell, when it gets returned, gets placed into here. At which point we further modify it by changing the text label, and finally we return the cell to our current table view inside our category view controller class. So it seems a little bit roundabout, and it's all in the name of trying to modularize our code and trying to reduce repetition and keep our code dry. So let's go ahead and hit run and see if our app actually runs and produces those cells, or will it crash and burn? So The moment of truth is now. So the first good sign is that we haven't had any errors and we've got both of our category cells with the text label.text filled out correctly. Now, the question is, are these swipe cells? Because if it only used the code here, then they're just going to be normal UI table view cells. But if our inheritance from the superclass worked correctly, then we should be able to click and drag, and there you go. There's our delete button. Now, if you click this delete button at this time point, it will crash your app. And the reason is because it triggers this particular delegate method, which is going to try and remove the last row in our table view. But we haven't removed it from our data source. So the incompatibility is going to lead to this error where it says invalid number of rows in section. So in order for that to work, we have to update our model. Now, because we can't call category inside our superclass, you have to realize that your superclass must know nothing about its subclasses. So we cannot use any of these bits of code, but we can trigger a function call. So let's create a function down here. So we'll call it update model. And the external parameter will be at, so we can call it like update model at this particular index path. But inside the function, we'll just call it index path. And it's going to be of data type index path. And inside this function is where we will update our data model. Okay, so now we need to call it over here. So we're going to call update model at the index path, which is going to be the same one that triggered this delete delegate method. So we'll call it index path. And because we're inside a closure, we always have to add the keyword self. And now we can cut this block of code and we can go into our category view controller. Now inside our category view controller, under the data manipulation method section, we've got save, we've got load, and now we're going to create a delete section, and we'll call it delete data from swipe. Now, instead of creating a method inside our current class, I'm going to override and call the superclass method, which we named update models. So override update models at index path, and we're going to override that update model method that was specified over here. So when our delete action happens, it's going to call update models, passing in an index path, at which point not really very much happens, but we can tap into it over here by overriding it. So this is where we're going to paste that block of code, and I'm going to uncomment it and shift it to the left a bit using command left square bracket. And this should take care of updating our model. So let's run our app and see if it works. All right, so let's add a new category. Hit add. And let's just check to make sure that we've got a delete button when we swipe on it. So that comes from our superclass. And now if I hit the delete button, you can see that this delegate method deleted our category from our data model. So this is more of an advanced example of some of the things that we learned on objects and classes and inheritance especially. And it's really, really key that you understand how subclasses, superclasses, overriding, how all of this works. So it's important that you play around with this update model function and also where you override it over here. For example, if we create a print statement here that just says item deleted from superclass, and then we go over to our category view controller, if we run our app as is, we are not going to get that print statement in here. And I'm going to show you by running our app and creating new category, hit add, and I'm going to swipe it to delete it, no print statement. And the reason is because we've overridden how that method should function. But if we made a call to the super update models at index path method, then we will get that print statement. So let's add a new category. And now if I swipe and delete, you can see item deleted from superclass. And that's all because of this call to the superclass method. So essentially what's happening is that our deletion triggers this delegate method. This delegate method has a closure which triggers the update models at index path, and it passes in the index path of the cell that got swiped. That calls this function over here, which has a print statement. But this function is overridden in the subclass. And that subclass can either call the superclass method in order to run all the code that's currently inside here, or it can simply override it without the need for any of the superclass functionality. So if all of that makes sense, then it's time for your next challenge. And that is, of course, the fact that we have a to-do list view controller, which is also going to now subclass the SwipeTableViewController instead of a UITableViewController. So the challenge is for you to implement that swipe cell functionality inside the to-do list view controller. And you will need to understand subclassing, superclassing, and all of the things that we've done over here in order to make it work and complete the challenge. If you need, it might be worth reviewing some of the lectures earlier on where we talked about objects, classes, inheritance, and having a look at the steps that we went through to update our category view controller to be a subclass of SwipeTableViewController. But this is quite challenging, and I suspect that it might take you a little while to figure everything out. But if you do get it right, then you'll know for sure that all of these concepts made sense to you. So rather than proving it to anyone else, prove it to yourself that you've understood everything. So go forth and struggle, and I will see you on the other side.